Hey guys, I'm Mark. Today is one of my favorite days of the whole year because it's tomato planting day. To my left here, you can see one of my tomato beds that I've prepared and I'm getting ready to plant up. This is just one of 10 beds that I'm going to be doing this year of this size. You can see by the way that the tomato plants are laid out that I'm going to be doing 8 plants in this bed this year. So I'm going to be doing 80 plants total, 8 per bed, 10 beds total. You can see I've already got one planted in here already on the far corner. There's 4 different varieties that are growing in this particular bed. Well, there's Big Zack as these 2. That's a great big huge tomato. And then to the left and right of center there, that's Virginia Sweets, the town favorite. The 2 right there in the middle are Brandywine Pink, the Sudeth strain. And then on the very end is one of my favorites for flavor, and that's Ananas Noir, or the black pineapple. And I have a whole roster of a whole bunch of other varieties that I'm going to be doing this year. My buddy Dave actually gave me over 20 different kinds of seedlings that I'm going to be growing this year for the first time. And I think I'm going to do another video describing each one of the varieties. I'll kind of give you a little tour once everything's planted up, and I'll show you what each one, well, I guess they just look like tomato plants right now, but I'll walk around and I'll describe what each one's going to wind up looking like in the end. But for sake of time, I think this video I'm just going to talk about some cultural things, how I plant the tomatoes, what's in the soil, my mulches, cages, and then just some basic things short term going forward. I'm not going to talk about like end of the road things like harvesting and things like that. I'm just going to basically talk about planting and then what are some things that I'm going to be looking for or doing over the next maybe a month or 2. So like I said, I got 4 different varieties in here. I planted one already. This soil that I'm planting into is this is the second year that this bed even exists. And last year I filled it with 2 yards of topsoil, like regular native topsoil from this area, and then 1 yard of cow manure. Now that was last year, and that's why I grew my tomatoes in last year. This year, I added on top of that an additional yard, of mushroom soil, just for a little bit of extra humus and organic matter. And on top of that, I added 10 pounds of lime, of pelleted limestone. And the reason I did that is because I think that the mushroom soil, we dropped my pH down a little bit, made it a little more acidic, I think. My pH meter was below a 6, and I want it to be somewhere up around 6.5. So I tilled in 10 pounds of limestone when I added the mushroom soil, and I think things should be pretty much right on par. I'm going to do another soil test here in another week or so and see if I need to do any top layer, or at least right before I lay out all my mulch. As far as mulch goes, once I plant these this year, I'm going to be using grass clippings, one of my favorites, and I'm going to be laying them on really, really thick. For the purposes of right now and today, like as I plant, I'm just going to put a little donut of grass clippings around each plant, just enough to sort of supply or keep the moisture in the ground right around that little seedling until I can get the time to cover the whole bed with a real nice thick layer of grass clippings. And when I say thick, I mean pretty thick, like maybe this high. So a good 6-8 inches would be fine when it's dried out like this, because what'll happen is the rain will come and it's going to settle down a lot to really maybe like 2 inches in the end. And then it'll break down pretty significantly throughout the season from there going forward. So you really can't use too much grass clippings, I find. The spiders also love them. So that's a great thing to build habitat for spiders and to have spiders keeping your pests at bay. But one thing I wanted to mention about when you're laying your grass clippings out and you're using them as mulch is you always want to leave just a little bit of a space tucked away from the base of the stem. Because what will happen sometimes when you're using fresh grass clippings like this is you'll get a heavy rain or something and they'll start to break down very fast, and they'll almost get sort of slimy in some places. And you don't want that slimy sort of grass clipping-ishness to be right up against the stem of the plant, or that could cause some rotting issues. So just keep them tucked away a little bit from the stem and you'll be just fine. So as far as planting goes, I'll show you how I actually put it in the ground. This plant I'm going to bury up to like here, as high up as I can. Basically get the last 2 leaves exposed above the soil surface, and that sounds like I'm taking a lot off of it, but really in the end you're going to wind up getting a much stronger root system, because all these hairs going all the way down the stem are going to turn into roots, and you're just going to get a much more vigorous plant at the end of the season. So before I plant it, I'm just going to cut off all the branches. Just use a sharp knife, just make sure it's clean. And always make sure, I'll cut that one off too. And always make sure that, at least I always make sure that my plants are really heavily watered in before I go ahead and plant them. I don't ever want to stick a dry root ball in the soil. That's just a good measure to follow in general. But I've got my plants spaced out, and I got little stakes in where each one is going to wind up going. Now the spacing on these, so like I said, there's 8 plants to this whole bed, and you can sort of see how they're laid out. This particular one is 2 feet in off the edge this way and 2 feet in off the edge this way. And then the ones in the middle and then the ones on the very end are also 2 feet in. Now the ones just to the left and right of center, they're 5 feet off of this one. So this one will go here, and then 5 feet down the bed, there's that middle one, and then another 5 feet, there's those 2, and so on and so forth. So the actual spacing between this one and the one right there is really like a little bit over 5 feet, like 5'4". And the spacing between this one here and that guy there is 4 feet-ish. But I laid all my stakes out ahead of time, make sure everything's right where I want it. And I'm just making sure that I get it nice and deep. A good root system is really probably your #1 key to success. As far as taking up water goes, I don't water my tomato plants at all once they become established. I might water them once or twice, maybe 3 times in the very beginning of the season. Like after I plant today, I'm going to give these a really heavy soak. And then maybe a few days from now, if it doesn't rain, I'll give them another really good soak. But I basically want to just deprive them of water so that they send down roots deep to find the water. And that's really what you want them to do, because in the end you get a much more resilient plant. The plant is not depending on you to supply its water. Like if I am out here every day with a hose and I'm watering these tomato plants, well then most of the root activity is going to be right up on top of the surface, and they're waiting for me to come by and water them every day. But the problem with that is if I forget for a day or two, or something happens and I can't do it, then the plant is going to wind up suffering. So I don't water at all. I basically just rely on a really thick covering of mulch to keep things pretty stable. Drip irrigation, I see a lot of people use that and have a lot of good success with that. Now, drip irrigation is wonderful. The only thing is you want to make sure you have it on a timer, or again, you have it consistent, because again, you are training those plants to rely on that, depend on that water being there. So if you skip it for a few days, then you can wind up putting them under stress. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to plant this bed up. I'm going to put grass clippings down just in a little donut for now. This weekend, I'm going to wind up covering everything, the entire bed, all the way nice and deep with grass clippings, and they're just a wonderful, excellent mulch. I mean, once it rains, like I mentioned before, they're going to sort of get packed down, and what happens is all these little grass clipping leaves, I guess, will link together and lock together, and it forms this really like dense mat that's pretty much impenetrable to a lot of weeds coming up through. And it's also really high in nitrogen by virtue of just being fresh grass clippings. Straw is wonderful too. You can use straw like on the potato beds behind me there. That's another excellent mulch, but you're just going to have to lay it just a little bit thicker, I think, than you would with the grass clippings. And in my case, the grass clippings are free. We've got a lot of grass on this farm, and we don't have the equipment here to harvest straw, so I have to buy straw if I'm going to use it. So for me personally, grass clippings are a much more economical option as well. And you can see that I'll mention the garlic here too, just because that's in frame. That's in the same soil that this is, but instead of using straw, I used shredded leaves last fall. Last fall, when I planted the garlic, that's what I had a lot of, so that's what I used. I ran over a bunch of leaves and shredded them up, and that particular mulch has worked really well on those, keeping the weeds down. Cages will go on about a week or two from now once the plants get sort of established. I did a video on how I make my cages. It's called How to Make Tomato Cages That Last, if you want to check that out. But basically these are made out of livestock panels, which I bend, and the cage ultimately winds up being 24 inches by 24 inches by 50 inches tall. And they are just held together with zip ties. And you don't have to get like real expensive zip ties or anything, because like I say, I cut them down at the end of the season, or I cut them apart and restack them. You just saw how they're stacked here, and it makes them really convenient for storage. So just get like the regular 8-inch zip ties. They don't have to be the UV rated ones or whatever. And they go together like that. And they just I'm not gonna put 10, 12 zip ties on here right now, but I will just mention a couple of things about the cages. They're great for getting your hand through. Some cage material, you got to be sort of careful with how big your squares are, because some of these indeterminate plants will produce some pretty sizable tomatoes. So you do definitely, whatever you wind up using, you want something that you can get your hand through and get a large fruit out of. But like I say, these work really, really well for me. I'm actually going to use these also with my peppers this year. I'm going to try out a new method with at least growing my hot peppers. I want to do 5 hot pepper plants on the side, on the inside of one of these cages, and then have them sort of grow up through it. That's just going to be another use for one of these. But tomatoes, peppers, you could grow cucumbers in this. You could even grow like cantaloupes on here, peas, pole beans. There's all kinds of things you could use these for, and that I intend to use these for. So that's about it. I've got my work cut out for me today. Like I say, I'm going to be putting in 80 plants, and then keep an eye out for another video that I'm going to do. I'm going to talk about the varieties and explain the differences in them, and some new ones this year that I'm really looking forward to. So that's my video. I hope you liked it. Thank you so much for watching. See you on the next one.